The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the weathered timber station, and Penelope Vaughn stepped down into the dusty street of Calistoga, California, with nothing but the thin cotton dress on her back and the worn shoes on her feet. The summer of 1878 had been unforgiving, baking the earth until it cracked like old leather, and she felt every eye in town turn toward her as she stood there, a solitary figure against the endless blue sky. Her trunk, containing what few possessions she had managed to salvage from her previous life in Boston, had been stolen during a station stop in Nevada, and now she had arrived to meet a man she had never seen with absolutely nothing to offer him but herself. The station master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, squinted at her from beneath his hat. "You the mail-order bride for Kane Hollister." Penelope swallowed hard, her throat dry from 2 weeks of travel across the unforgiving landscape. "I am. Penelope Vaughn from Boston." "He will be here shortly. He is never late." The station master gestured toward a wooden bench in the shade. "You can wait there, miss." She moved to the bench, her legs trembling beneath her skirts. The anxiety that had been building since she realized her trunk was gone now threatened to overwhelm her completely. What would this rancher think when she arrived with nothing? The letters they had exchanged over the past 6 months had been warm, even tender, but those were just words on paper. Now she would have to face the reality of marrying a stranger, and she could not even present herself properly without a change of clothes or a single possession to prove she was a woman of some substance. The sound of horse hooves on packed earth made her look up. A tall man rode into view on a powerful buckskin mare, his broad shoulders outlined against the sun. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback, and as he turned toward her, Penelope felt her breath catch. Kane Hollister was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of amber. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar of his chambray shirt, and despite the dust of the trail, there was something striking about him that made her heart beat faster. He removed his hat as he approached, and she saw kindness in his expression along with curiosity. "Miss Vaughn," she stood quickly, smoothing her travel-stained dress with trembling hands. "Yes, Mr. Hollister, I must tell you something right away. My trunk was stolen in Nevada. Everything I owned was in that trunk. I have arrived with nothing, and I understand if you wish to reconsider our arrangement." The words tumbled out in a rush, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had rehearsed this speech a dozen times during the final leg of her journey, but actually speaking it aloud made her situation feel even more desperate. Kane studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes moving across her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. It was a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire countenance. "Miss Vaughn, you brought yourself, and that is everything. I did not write those letters to a trunk full of dresses and trinkets. I wrote them to you." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had not cried when her father died, leaving her penniless. She had not cried when her aunt turned her out of the only home she had left. She would not cry now, not in front of this stranger who was offering her more grace than she had any right to expect. "That is very kind of you to say," she managed. "It is not kindness, it is the truth." Kane held out his hand to her. "Come, let me take you home." She placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. He helped her up onto the wagon that waited nearby, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of town, Penelope watched Calistoga disappear behind them, a collection of wooden buildings clustered in the valley like forgotten toys. The ranch lay 10 miles north of town. Kane explained as they traveled. nestled in a valley between rolling hills covered in golden grass. He raised cattle primarily, with some horses on the side. He had built the house himself 5 years ago, after saving enough money working for other ranchers to buy his own land. His parents had died during his childhood, and he had one sister who had married and moved to Oregon. He spoke matter-of-factly about his life, without embellishment or complaint, and Penelope found herself listening not just to his words but to the cadence of his voice, the way he looked at the land around them with obvious pride. "Why did you decide to seek a mail-order bride?" she asked after a while. The question had been burning in her mind since she first received his letter in response to her advertisement. A man like this, attractive and established, could surely find a wife locally. Kane was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "I suppose I could have courted someone from town, but I wanted something different. The women I met here, they either wanted to change everything about ranch life, or they only saw the land as something to be endured. Your letters, they showed someone who was willing to embrace a new life, who had courage and intelligence. Those qualities matter more to me than familiarity." "And what if I am not who you think I am from those letters?" Penelope asked, surprising herself with her boldness. He glanced at her, and she saw amusement in his expression. "Then we will discover who you really are together. But I have a sense about people, Miss Vaughn, and I believe you are exactly who you presented yourself to be." The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, and Penelope caught her breath. The house was larger than she had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a stable, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, their coats gleaming red and brown in the afternoon sun. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. "It is wonderful," she said softly. Kane pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "It needs a woman's touch. I built it sturdy, but I am afraid I lack the skill for making it a true home." He helped her down from the wagon, and as her feet touched the ground, a woman emerged from the house. She was older, perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that assessed Penelope in an instant. "This is Mrs. Dalton," Kane said. "She has been helping with the cooking and cleaning since I sent word that you were coming. She lives in town but has agreed to stay out here until you feel settled. Mrs. Dalton." Penelope offered a small curtsy, aware of how ridiculous it must look in her dusty, wrinkled dress. The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Welcome, Miss Vaughn. Mr. Hollister has spoken of nothing but your arrival for weeks. Let me show you to your room so you can freshen up before supper." "She lost her trunk," Kane interjected. "Everything she owned was stolen during the journey." Mrs. Dalton clicked her tongue in sympathy. "That is a terrible misfortune. Well, I have some dresses that might be altered to fit you temporarily, and we can arrange for the dressmaker in town to make you some proper clothes." "I cannot pay for them," Penelope said quietly, shame coloring her voice. "I have no money at all." "You are to be my wife," Kane said firmly. "What is mine is yours. We will get you whatever you need." The casual certainty in his voice made something flutter in her chest. She had been so focused on the practical aspects of this arrangement, the way it would provide her with security and a home, that she had not allowed herself to consider what it might be like to actually be married to this man. Now, standing in front of his house with the California sun beating down and his amber eyes watching her with undisguised interest, she felt the reality of her situation settle over her like a blanket. Mrs. Dalton led her inside, and Penelope found herself in a large, open room that served as both kitchen and living area. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was scrupulously clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows on 3 sides let in abundant light. Stairs led to the second floor, and Mrs. Dalton guided her up to a bedroom that overlooked the front of the property. "This will be your room until the wedding," the older woman said. "Mr. Hollister has been sleeping in his own room down the hall. He is a gentleman, that one. You need not worry about impropriety." The room was spacious, with a large bed covered in a simple quilt, a wardrobe, a dresser with a mirror, and a washstand. It was far nicer than the cramped boarding house room she had occupied in Boston before coming west. "It is lovely," Penelope said sincerely. Mrs. Dalton studied her with those sharp eyes. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone harder, perhaps, someone more desperate, but you have gentle manners and an educated way of speaking." "What brought you to answer a mail-order bride advertisement?" Penelope moved to the window, looking out at the endless landscape. "My father was a professor at Harvard. When he died last year, I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. Everything was sold to pay them, and I had no inheritance, no means of supporting myself. My aunt took me in, but she made it clear I was a burden. I worked as a governess for a time, but the family moved to Europe and did not wish to take me with them. I had a choice between the factories or finding a husband. I chose this." "And do you regret it?" Penelope turned to face the older woman. "I have been here less than an hour. I cannot yet say if I regret it, but I can say that Mr. Hollister has been kinder than I expected." "That is a good beginning." Mrs. Dalton nodded approvingly. "He is a good man, lost his parents young and had to grow up fast, but he has never let hardship make him cruel. You could do far worse." After Mrs. Dalton left her to wash and rest, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. The enormity of what she had done was only now beginning to sink in. She had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, and now she was in his house, preparing to become his wife. The wedding was planned for 3 days hence, giving her time to adjust and for the banns to be properly posted. She wondered what her father would think if he could see her now. He had been a man of books and ideas, uncomfortable with practical matters, which was why he had died leaving her in such straits. But he had also taught her to be brave, to face challenges with intelligence and grace. She would need all of that now. A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Kane opened the door carrying a bundle of fabric. "Mrs. Dalton thought these might be useful. They were my mother's. She was about your size." He set the bundle on the bed, and Penelope saw dresses, undergarments, and a nightgown, all carefully preserved. The gesture touched her deeply. These were clearly precious to him, yet he was offering them to her without hesitation. "Thank you," she said. "I will take good care of them." Kane nodded, but he made no move to leave. He stood there, his hat in his hands, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I want you to know that you do not have to go through with this if you do not wish to. I will not hold you to our agreement if you have changed your mind. I can arrange for you to return to Boston or to go anywhere else you wish." Penelope stood, smoothing her skirts. "Why would you offer that? You need a wife, do you not?" "I need a willing wife, not a prisoner. If you feel trapped or coerced, this will never work." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, close enough to smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to him. "I am here of my own free will, Mr. Hollister. I may have arrived with nothing, but I am not nothing. I can work hard, I can learn, and I will be a true partner to you if you will have me." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that had not been there before. "Then we understand each other. And please call me Kane. We are to be married in 3 days. We should not stand on formality." "Kane," she repeated, testing the sound of his name. "And you must call me Penelope, Penelope." He said it slowly, as if savoring each syllable. "It suits you." After he left, she unpacked the bundle of clothes and found everything she needed, from practical day dresses to a beautiful blue gown that must have been kept for special occasions. She held the blue dress up to herself and looked in the mirror, imagining what it would be like to wear it, to be the kind of woman who belonged in this place. That evening, she joined Kane and Mrs. Dalton for supper. The meal was simple but well prepared: beef stew with fresh bread and butter, followed by apple pie. As they ate, Kane told her about the workings of the ranch, the rhythm of the seasons, the challenges of raising cattle in this climate. She listened attentively, asking questions that seemed to please him with their intelligence. "You will need to learn to ride," he said as they finished their meal. "The ranch is large, and you cannot always rely on a wagon to get around." "I have never been on a horse," Penelope admitted. "In Boston, we walked or took carriages. Then I will teach you. We can start tomorrow if you are willing." "I am willing to learn whatever I need to know." Mrs. Dalton excused herself to clean up, and Penelope moved to help her, but the older woman waved her away. "You sit and talk with your intended. I will manage." Left alone with Kane, Penelope felt suddenly shy. In the lamplight, he looked younger, more approachable. She found herself studying his hands, the way they rested on the table, strong and capable. "Tell me about your family," she said. "You mentioned your parents died when you were young." Kane leaned back in his chair, his expression growing distant. "I was 10 when we were traveling west. Both my parents caught cholera and died within days of each other. My sister Sarah was 12. We were taken in by a rancher who needed workers. He was not a kind man, but he taught us how to survive. Sarah married when she was 18 and left as soon as she could. I stayed until I was 20 and had saved enough to strike out on my own. That must have been very difficult." "It was what it was. I learned that you can endure almost anything if you have a reason to keep going. My reason was this land, this dream of having something that was truly mine." He looked at her intently. "What kept you going, Penelope, when your father died and you lost everything?" She considered the question carefully. "Pride, I suppose. I did not want to become a charity case or marry the first man who would have me out of sheer desperation. I wanted to choose my own path, even if that path led me here, to a place I had never seen, to marry a man I had never met. At least it was my choice. And now that you are here, you still feel it was the right choice. Ask me again in a month," she said with a small smile. "But so far I have no complaints," he laughed, a rich sound that filled the room. "Fair enough." Over the next 3 days, Penelope fell into the rhythm of the ranch. She rose early, helped Mrs. Dalton with breakfast, and spent the mornings learning the layout of the house and the various tasks required to keep it running. In the afternoons, Kane gave her riding lessons on a gentle mare named Daisy. The first time she mounted the horse, she felt terrified, certain she would fall, but Kane's steady presence beside her, his calm instructions and patient corrections, gradually built her confidence. By the 3rd day, she could walk and trot without clinging to the saddle horn, and the look of approval in Kane's eyes made her feel prouder than any academic achievement had ever done. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in the small church in Calistoga. Mrs. Dalton had altered the blue dress to fit Penelope perfectly, and the dressmaker had contributed a simple veil as a gift. Kane wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, and Penelope felt her heart race as she walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was brief, conducted by a circuit preacher who served several towns in the area. Penelope spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, and when Kane slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she felt the weight of it like a promise. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Kane kissed her softly, almost tentatively, and she tasted the future in that kiss. A small reception followed at the town hall, attended by neighboring ranchers and townspeople who were curious about Kane's new bride. Penelope found herself overwhelmed by the friendliness of these rough, practical people. They brought gifts, despite her protests, practical things like quilts and preserves and kitchen tools. A young woman named Clara, the wife of a neighboring rancher, took Penelope aside and told her that if she ever needed anything, she should not hesitate to come calling. "It can be lonely out here," Clara said. "Especially for women, we have to look out for each other." As the sun began to set, Kane and Penelope returned to the ranch in the wagon. Mrs. Dalton had returned to town, leaving them alone for the first time as husband and wife. The reality of their new relationship hung between them, unspoken but present. Kane carried her over the threshold, setting her down gently in the main room. "I know this is all very new," he said. "We can take things as slowly as you need." Penelope looked up at him, this man who was now her husband, and made a decision. "I do not want to rush, but I also do not want to pretend this is not real. We are married now, Kane. I want this to be a true marriage." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and she felt herself respond to him in ways she had not anticipated. There was desire there, yes, but also something softer, something that felt like the beginning of genuine affection. He led her upstairs to his room, which was now their room, and in the darkness, with moonlight streaming through the windows, they came together as husband and wife. Later, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Penelope listened to the steady beat of his heart and felt something shift inside her. This was not the passionate love of novels and poems, not yet, but it was something real and solid. It was a foundation on which something beautiful could be built. "What are you thinking?" Kane asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I am grateful, that I did not expect to feel this way so soon." "What way?" "Safe, content, perhaps even happy." He tightened his arms around her. "I will do everything in my power to make sure you always feel that way." The weeks that followed settled into a pattern. Penelope took over the household management from Mrs. Dalton, who returned to town after showing her everything she needed to know. She learned to cook the hearty meals that Kane needed after long days working with the cattle. She learned to preserve food for the winter, to tend the kitchen garden, to do the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch house running. But she also discovered that ranch life offered unexpected freedoms. In Boston, her life had been constrained by social expectations and financial limitations. Here, she could ride out across the hills on Daisy, could feel the wind in her hair and the sun on her face. She could wear practical clothes instead of restrictive corsets and heavy skirts. She could speak her mind to Kane without fear of being dismissed or patronized. Kane, for his part, seemed to delight in her company. He taught her about the cattle, explaining bloodlines and breeding with the same passion her father had once used to discuss literature. He showed her how to read the weather, how to understand the land. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, and she would read to him from the books she had loved in her old life, sharing those stories with him as he shared his world with her. One evening in early fall, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kane took her hand. "I have something to tell you." The seriousness in his tone made her turn to look at him. "What is it?" "When I first wrote to you, I thought I was looking for a partner, someone to help run the ranch and share the work. But Penelope, you have become so much more than that. I find myself thinking about you constantly. When I am out with the cattle, I am eager to return home because you are here. When you smile, it feels like the sun coming out. I think I am falling in love with you." Her breath caught. She had felt it too, this growing connection between them, but she had been afraid to name it. "Kane, I feel the same way. I did not expect this. I thought this would be a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience. But somehow, you have made me feel things I never imagined." He pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that still surprised her with its intensity. "Then we are both fortunate beyond measure." That night, their lovemaking took on a new depth, a new meaning. It was no longer just the fulfillment of marital obligations, but an expression of genuine feeling, of two people choosing each other not out of necessity but out of desire. The following weeks brought challenges that tested their growing bond. A fever swept through the cattle, killing several and requiring round-the-clock care for the others. Penelope worked alongside Kane, learning to tend the sick animals, to recognize symptoms, to make the difficult decisions about which ones could be saved. She saw him at his most exhausted and frustrated, and she loved him even more for the way he refused to give up, for the gentleness he showed even to dying animals. When the fever finally passed, they had lost 15 head of cattle, a significant financial setback. Kane stood in the pasture, surveying the loss, and Penelope came up beside him. "We will recover from this," she said firmly. "It will be a hard winter. Then we will face it together. You are not alone anymore, Kane." He looked at her, and she saw gratitude and love in his expression. "No, I am not, and that makes all the difference." In November, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Kane one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he seemed stunned, unable to speak. Then a smile broke across his face, transforming him. A child. Truly, truly. The baby should come in early summer. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the room until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are going to have a family," he said wonderingly. "A real family." That night they lay in bed making plans for the future. They would need to prepare a nursery, would need to purchase supplies. Kane talked about teaching his son or daughter to ride, to love the land as he did. Penelope imagined reading to their child, passing on her love of books and learning. The winter was indeed difficult. Snow came early and stayed late, and there were times when Penelope wondered if they had enough supplies to last until spring. But Kane's careful planning and her frugal management saw them through. On the coldest nights, they would lie together in their bed, and Kane would place his hand on her growing belly, marveling at the life growing there. "What shall we name the baby?" Penelope asked one such night. "If it is a boy, I would like to name him after my father. His name was James." "James Hollister, I like that. And if it is a girl, you choose." "I trust your judgment," she thought for a moment. "My mother's name was Rose. I barely remember her, but my father always said she was beautiful and kind." "Then Rose it is if we have a daughter." Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers covering the hills, and Penelope's belly swelled as the land came back to life. She felt ungainly and uncomfortable, but Kane treated her like precious porcelain, insisting she rest frequently, taking over tasks she had previously managed. "I am pregnant, not infirm," she protested one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "I know, but indulge me. I cannot bear the thought of anything happening to you or the baby." His concern touched her, even as it sometimes frustrated her. She understood that this vulnerability was new to him, that loving her and anticipating their child had opened him up to fears he had never experienced before. In late May, Clara came to stay at the ranch, ready to help when the baby arrived. She brought her 2 young children with her, and Penelope enjoyed their lively presence in the house. Kane arranged for the doctor from Calistoga to be on call, though Clara assured them that she had helped deliver many babies and knew what to do. The labor began on a warm June evening. Penelope had been feeling restless all day, unable to settle, and when the first real pain hit, she knew the time had come. Kane sent one of his ranch hands racing to town for the doctor, but the baby was not willing to wait. Clara took charge with calm efficiency, and Penelope found herself grateful for the other woman's experience. The pain was worse than anything she had imagined, waves of agony that seemed endless. Kane stayed with her, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement. "You are doing beautifully," he told her. "You are the strongest person I know." When the baby finally came, announcing his arrival with a lusty cry, Penelope felt tears stream down her face. Clara placed the infant in her arms, and she looked down at the red, wrinkled face of her son with overwhelming love. "James," she whispered. "Welcome, James." Kane touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, his expression filled with wonder. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you both so much." The doctor arrived an hour later to check on mother and baby, pronounced them both healthy, and accepted a drink and a meal before heading back to town. That night, with baby James sleeping in a cradle beside their bed, Kane and Penelope lay together in the darkness. "A year ago I was standing on that platform in Calistoga with nothing," Penelope said softly. "Now I have everything." "We have everything," Kane corrected. "And I mean what I said that first day. You brought yourself, and that was everything. Everything else we have built together." Life with a newborn was exhausting in ways Penelope had not anticipated. James was a hungry baby, waking frequently to nurse, and she spent many nights pacing the floor with him, singing soft lullabies her father had once sung to her. Kane helped when he could, changing diapers and rocking the baby so Penelope could rest. As James grew, he revealed himself to be a calm, observant child with his father's amber eyes and his mother's dark hair. By the time he was 6 months old, he could sit up on his own, studying everything around him with serious concentration. Kane would place him in a basket while he worked in the barn, talking to him as if he could understand every word. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Kane bought more cattle, expanded his operations, and hired 2 full-time ranch hands to help with the work. Penelope transformed the house into a true home, adding curtains and cushions, starting flower beds, creating a library from the books she ordered from San Francisco. When James was 2 years old, Penelope became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. The baby, a daughter they named Rose as planned, arrived on a snowy December evening. She was smaller than James had been, with delicate features and blonde hair that neither parent could account for, until Kane's sister Sarah visited and pointed out that their mother had been blonde. Rose proved to be a more challenging baby than James, fussy and difficult to soothe. But Kane was endlessly patient with her, walking her for hours when she cried, singing nonsensical songs that somehow calmed her. Watching him with their daughter, Penelope fell in love with him all over again. The years passed quickly, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their children. James became his father's shadow, following him everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. Rose, as she grew, revealed herself to be fearless and stubborn, refusing to be left behind when her father and brother went out to work with the cattle. Penelope found fulfillment not just in her family but in her role in the community. She started a lending library in Calistoga, donating many of her own books and soliciting donations from others. She taught several ranch children to read, holding classes in her home during the winter months. Clara remained a close friend, and the two families visited frequently, their children growing up together. One evening, when James was 7 and Rose was 5, Kane and Penelope sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done so many times before. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening air. "You ever think about how different your life would have been if you had not come west?" Kane asked. Penelope considered the question. "Sometimes. I might have ended up working in a factory, or married to someone suitable but loveless in Boston. I might have been comfortable, perhaps, but I would never have been truly happy. I would never have known what it was like to be loved the way you love me." "I was lost before you came," Kane said. "I did not realize it then, but I was just going through the motions, building something without understanding why. You gave me purpose beyond the ranch. You gave me a family, a reason for all of this." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "We saved each other, I think." "Yes," he agreed. "We did." When James was 10 and Rose was 8, Kane decided to expand the ranch's operations to include horse breeding. He purchased several fine mares and a stallion from a breeder in Sacramento, and the whole family became involved in the new venture. James showed a natural talent for working with the horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animals. Rose, meanwhile, developed a knack for recognizing quality bloodlines and predicting which pairings would produce the best offspring. Penelope found herself serving as the business manager for this new enterprise, corresponding with potential buyers, keeping careful records of lineages and sales. The work used skills she had thought left behind in Boston, and she discovered she had a talent for negotiation and marketing. The horse breeding operation proved profitable beyond their expectations. Within 3 years, Hollister Ranch was known throughout California for producing exceptional horses. Buyers came from as far away as Arizona and Oregon to purchase their stock. Success brought new challenges. They needed more staff, which meant building additional housing and managing more people. There were disagreements with neighbors over water rights and grazing land. There were droughts that tested their resources and unexpected expenses that strained their finances. Through it all, Kane and Penelope faced each challenge together. They had learned to communicate with honesty, to support each other's decisions, to compromise when necessary. Their love, which had begun as a tentative connection between strangers, had deepened into something unshakable. When Penelope was 35 and Kane was 40, they welcomed their third child, a son they named William. His arrival was unexpected but joyful. James, now 13, took his role as big brother seriously, and Rose, at 11, appointed herself the baby's protector. William's birth brought new energy to the household. The older children, who had been growing more independent, suddenly found themselves drawn back into the circle of family by this tiny new presence. Penelope watched her family gather around the baby and felt her heart might burst with happiness. One afternoon, as she nursed William on the porch while watching James and Rose work with the horses in the corral, Clara came to visit. She had aged gracefully, her children now grown and starting families of their own. "You look content," Clara observed, settling into the chair beside Penelope. "I am. It seems almost impossible that I arrived here 16 years ago with nothing but the dress on my back. Kane told everyone in town what he said to you that day, about how you brought yourself, and that was everything. I think that is when people really started to respect him, not just as a rancher but as a man. It took wisdom to see past circumstances to the person beneath." Penelope thought about that first day, how terrified she had been, how certain that Kane would send her back to Boston. "I think we were both wiser than we knew. We took a risk on each other, and it paid off in ways neither of us could have imagined. The years continued to pass. James grew into a young man who combined his father's work ethic with his mother's intelligence. At 18, he took over much of the daily management of the ranch, allowing Kane to step back slightly and focus on the broader strategy. Rose, at 16, announced her intention to go to college in San Francisco to study veterinary medicine, a shocking ambition for a woman but one that both her parents supported. "If anyone can do it, you can," Kane told her. "You have never let anyone tell you what you cannot do." Rose left for San Francisco in the fall of 1897, and Penelope felt her absence keenly. But letters arrived regularly, full of details about her classes, her new friends, the exciting world of the city. Penelope shared these letters with Kane in the evenings, and they marveled at their daughter's courage and determination. William, meanwhile, grew into a thoughtful, artistic child who preferred books and drawing to working with cattle or horses. At first, Kane struggled with having a son so unlike himself, but Penelope helped him understand that William had his own gifts to offer. "Not every generation has to follow the exact same path," she told Kane gently. "We have James to carry on the ranch. Let William find his own way." Kane took this to heart, and as William grew, father and son found common ground in their love of the land itself, if not in how they interacted with it. William began drawing the landscape, the animals, the people of the ranch, and his sketches were so beautiful that Penelope had several framed and hung in the house. As Penelope entered her 40s, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place. She had arrived with nothing and had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined. She had raised 3 children, had helped build a successful ranch, had become a respected member of her community. Most importantly, she had loved and been loved by a man who saw her true value from the very beginning. One evening, as she and Kane celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner alone, he raised his glass to her. "To the woman who arrived with nothing and gave me everything." She smiled, touching her glass to his. "To the man who understood that a person's worth is not measured by what they carry but by who they are," they drank, and then Kane reached across the table to take her hand. "Would you do it all again? If you could go back to that day on the platform, knowing everything that would come after, would you still step down from that stage coach?" "Without hesitation," Penelope said. "Every challenge, every difficulty, every moment of fear or doubt has been worth it for what we have built together. You gave me a home, Kane, but more than that, you gave me a place where I could become who I was meant to be. And you gave me a reason to build something that would last beyond my own lifetime. Our children, our grandchildren someday, they will carry forward what we started. That is a kind of immortality." Their grandchildren did indeed begin to arrive. James married at 22, wedding a young woman from a neighboring ranch, and within a year, he and his wife presented Kane and Penelope with their first grandchild, a boy named Kane Jr. Rose, defying convention, completed her veterinary studies and opened a practice in Calistoga, treating both ranch animals and family pets. She married at 27, choosing a fellow veterinarian, and eventually gave birth to twin girls. William went east to study art in New York, but he returned after 3 years, declaring that he had seen enough of cities to last a lifetime. He built a studio on the ranch property and began creating paintings of the American West that gained recognition and sold in galleries in San Francisco and beyond. As Kane and Penelope grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibility to the next generation. James proved to be an able manager of the ranch, implementing new techniques while respecting the foundation his parents had built. Rose's veterinary skills ensured the health of their herds. William's artwork brought prestige to the Hollister name and attracted buyers who might not have otherwise known about them. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter, and Penelope moved among them, marveling at the life she and Kane had created together. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, she and Kane walked out to the hill where he had first shown her the ranch all those years ago. The house was larger now, expanded to accommodate their growing family. The barns and outbuildings had multiplied. The herds had grown substantially, but the essential character of the place remained unchanged. "You remember what I was wearing the day I arrived?" Penelope asked. Kane smiled. "A thin cotton dress, dusty from travel. You looked terrified and brave at the same time." "I was both. I thought my life was over when I lost my trunk. All my possessions, everything I had left of my old life gone. I felt like I had nothing to offer you. But you were wrong," Kane said. "You brought yourself, and that was everything. Your intelligence, your courage, your capacity for love, those were the things that mattered. Everything else, all of this, we built it together." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. After 30 years, they had learned to communicate as much through silence as through words. Penelope leaned against her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, the strength that had never wavered in all their years together. "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you for so long now that I cannot remember what it was like not to love you." "And I love you," Kane replied. "Every day, I thank God that you stepped down from that stagecoach. Every day, I am grateful that you chose me." As they walked back to the house, their hands clasped together, Penelope thought about the young woman she had been, arriving in California with nothing but hope and determination. That woman had been afraid, but had refused to let fear stop her from taking a chance on something new. She had found not just a husband but a true partner, not just a home but a purpose, not just security but profound happiness. The ranch lights glowed warm in the darkness, beckoning them home. Inside, their children and grandchildren slept safely, the next generation of Hollisters who would carry the family forward. It was a legacy built not on wealth or status but on love, hard work, and the courage to believe that sometimes arriving with nothing means you have everything to gain. Years continued to flow like the seasons they marked, each one bringing changes both subtle and profound. Kane's hair turned silver, and lines deepened around Penelope's eyes, but these signs of aging only seemed to make them more precious to each other. They had weathered decades together, had faced down droughts and disease, financial struggles and family crises, and had emerged stronger for each challenge overcome. When Kane turned 60 and Penelope 55, they decided to take a trip that had long been postponed. They traveled by train to San Francisco, where Rose now lived with her family, and then continued north to Oregon to visit Kane's sister Sarah, whom Penelope had never met in person despite years of correspondence. Sarah proved to be a delightful woman, sharp-witted and warm-hearted, with Kane's same amber eyes. She and Penelope formed an immediate bond, staying up late into the night talking while Kane visited with his brother-in-law. On their last evening in Oregon, Sarah pulled Penelope aside. "I was worried when Kane wrote to tell me he had found a mail-order bride," Sarah confessed. "It seemed desperate, and I thought he deserved better than a marriage of pure convenience. But seeing you two together, I understand now. You are perfect for each other." "He saved me," Penelope said simply. "I had nothing when I arrived, but he saw past that to who I really was." "And you saved him too," Sarah replied. "He was becoming hard, isolated. You softened him, opened him up to love and family. That is a great gift." The return journey to California gave Kane and Penelope time to talk about the future. James was managing the ranch beautifully, and their other children were thriving in their chosen paths. It was time, they agreed, to truly step back and enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They began to travel more, taking trips to see the Pacific Ocean, to visit the growing cities of the West, to explore places they had only read about. But they always returned to the ranch, to the land that had brought them together and sustained them through the years. On their 40th anniversary, the family gathered again for a massive celebration. By now, there were 8 grandchildren, ranging in age from newborn to 17. The house rang with voices, with laughter, with the beautiful chaos of a large, loving family. Standing at the head of the table during dinner, Kane raised his glass. 40 years ago, I was a lonely man with a ranch and an empty house. I wrote a letter to a woman I had never met, hoping to find someone who could share this life with me. What I found was so much more. Penelope, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend. You have given me children and grandchildren, a family to fill this house with joy. You arrived with nothing, but you brought everything that truly mattered. Penelope felt tears on her cheeks as she stood to respond. Kane saw me when I felt invisible. He valued me when I felt worthless. He loved me before he even knew me, loving the person I showed myself to be in letters, and then he loved the real me even more. Every good thing in my life stems from the moment I stepped off that stagecoach, and he chose to look past my circumstances to see my heart. The applause and cheers from their family filled the room, and as Kane kissed her, Penelope felt the weight of 4 decades of love and commitment in that simple gesture. As they moved into their 60s and 70s, Kane and Penelope settled into a peaceful routine. They rose early still, old habits dying hard, and would walk the property together in the cool morning air. Kane moved more slowly now, his joints stiff with arthritis, but he refused to give up his daily inspection of the ranch. Penelope's eyesight had weakened, requiring spectacles for reading, but she still maintained her lending library and taught reading to any child who wanted to learn. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to make their own marks on the world. Some stayed to work on the ranch, some moved away to pursue other dreams, but all of them carried with them the values that Kane and Penelope had instilled in their children, and that had been passed down. On a warm spring morning, shortly after their 45th anniversary, Kane collapsed while working in the barn. Penelope was there within moments, cradling his head in her lap while James ran for the doctor. As they waited, Kane looked up at her with those amber eyes that still made her heart skip a beat. "I am not afraid," he told her. "How could I be when I have lived such a blessed life?" "Do not talk like that," Penelope said, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to be fine." But they both knew better. The doctor arrived and confirmed that Kane's heart was failing. He was moved to their bedroom, and for 3 days he drifted in and out of consciousness. Penelope never left his side, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together, thanking him for every moment they had shared. On the 3rd day, with all their children and many of their grandchildren gathered around, Kane opened his eyes one last time and found Penelope's face. "You brought yourself," he whispered, "and that was everything." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes with a small smile on his face and slipped away peacefully. Penelope's grief was profound but not bitter. She had lost her greatest love, her partner of 45 years, but she had been blessed beyond measure to have had him for so long. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half of California, she stood straight and dry-eyed, accepting condolences with grace. "He was the best man I ever knew," she told person after person. "I was lucky to love him and be loved by him." In the months that followed, Penelope learned to navigate life without Kane. It was difficult, learning to sleep alone after decades of his presence beside her, eating meals without him across the table, making decisions without his input. But she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, and the ranch continued to thrive under James's management. She found purpose in writing, finally putting down on paper the story of her journey west, of meeting Kane, of building their life together. The manuscript grew to several hundred pages, a love letter to the man she had married and a testament to the life they had created. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rose came to sit beside her. "How do you do it, Mother? How do you bear losing him?" Penelope thought about the question carefully. "I bear it because I must, and because I know how fortunate I was to have him. Some people live their entire lives without experiencing the kind of love we shared. I had 45 years of it. How could I be anything but grateful for that?" "Do you regret coming west? If you had known how it would end, would you still have come?" "Oh, my darling girl," Penelope said, taking her daughter's hand. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment of joy, every challenge overcome, every year we had together, it was worth any pain that came after. Love is always worth the risk." Penelope lived another 12 years after Kane's death, remaining sharp and active well into her 80s. She saw more grandchildren marry, welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, and continued to be the matriarch of the sprawling Hollister clan. The ranch prospered, growing and adapting to the new century while maintaining the core values she and Kane had established. On her 86th birthday, surrounded by 4 generations of family, Penelope looked around the crowded house and felt complete satisfaction. She had arrived in California with nothing, a desperate woman taking a chance on an uncertain future. She was leaving behind a legacy of love, family, and hard work that would continue long after she was gone. That night, she pulled out the manuscript she had written years before, the story of her and Kane's love. She read through it one more time, made a few final edits, and then called James to her side. "I want you to keep this," she told him, handing him the bound pages. "It is the story of how your father and I built this family. I want your children and grandchildren to know where they came from, to understand that the greatest riches in life are not material possessions but love and family, and the courage to take chances on happiness." 2 weeks later, Penelope passed away quietly in her sleep, a peaceful end to a long and fulfilling life. Her funeral was even larger than Kane's had been, testimony to the impact she had made on her community. People came from all over California to pay their respects to the woman who had arrived with nothing and had built an empire of love. She was buried beside Kane on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same spot where they had stood so many times over the years, watching sunsets and talking about their dreams. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single inscription that James had chosen from his mother's manuscript. She arrived with nothing. He said she brought everything. Together they built a life beyond measure. Years later, Penelope's great-great-granddaughter would stand on that same hill, reading from the yellowed manuscript that had been carefully preserved through the generations. She would read about a young woman stepping off a stagecoach in 1878 with nothing but the dress on her back, about a rancher who saw past empty hands to a full heart, about a love that grew from a tentative beginning into something that spanned decades and shaped generations. The ranch still stood, still prospered, still bore the Hollister name. The house had been expanded and modernized, but the core structure remained, the same rooms where Penelope had raised her children, where she had loved and been loved. The values she and Kane had lived by still guided their descendants, teaching each new generation that true wealth is measured not in possessions but in relationships, not in what you have but in who you are. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings, when the light falls just right across the valley, visitors to the ranch swear they can see two figures standing on the hill, hand in hand, watching the sunset together as they did for 45 years of marriage and now through eternity. Whether this is true, or simply a romantic story told by descendants who want to believe in eternal love, no one can say for certain. But what is certain is this. On a dusty summer day in 1878, a woman with nothing met a man who understood that herself was everything. And from that meeting came a love story that would echo through generations, reminding all who heard it that the greatest adventures begin when we have the courage to risk everything on love, and that the richest life is one lived in partnership with someone who sees our true worth, even when we have lost sight of it ourselves.